in our lives and how it's costing us living, how we are throwing away our lives by stressing out, worrying, and feeling anxious. So today's episode is all about empowering you with techniques to recognize it and what you can do about it, and how you can get on top of your stress, worry, and anxiety, and better control how you respond to situations, and how you can get control of your life and take it into the direction that you want to take it in. So let's get underway with the topic and defining what is stress, worry, and anxiety. And yes, they're all interlinked, as you've probably realized. So stress, again, there's many forms of stress. So if we're talking mental stress, then it's certainly linked to worry and anxiety. There's also physical stresses, which can result in mental stress. So what do I mean by physical stress? Physical stresses are the amount of exertion, physical activity. So it can be over-exercising, can be a physical stress on the body. It just can be just doing too much and not allowing enough rest. Physical stress can be created through lack of sleep. So sleep deprivation can create that physical stress. It is, in essence, where our body's not restoring and repairing. So it's not doing the regeneration phase, and that happens at night. Or we are putting too much stress on our body, physical stress, that it can't get the repair work done at night, and it needs a number of nights to do the repair work. So yes, we can create physical stress through overactivity and not allowing enough rest and rejuvenation. There's also chemical stresses which come from the environment. So these are what we call the sort of those endocrine disruptors. So endocrine disruptors are the chemicals that are man-made, that are artificial, that are toxic when inside of our body. And there's many ways in which we can induce these toxic chemicals. We can do it through eating, so in the food chain, drinking, in the water supply, and just general exposure from day to day, such as household cleaning chemicals. And when we consume, like, say, fish have been living in the sea's accumulated a whole lot of toxic waste, and that finds its way into the food chain within the sea, and that finds its way into our food chain. And so these microplastics can cause a toxicity, a level of toxicity in our body, which causes inflammation and can cause all sorts of problems within our body, that excessive inflammation, particularly if we have continued exposure to that chemical stress. It's okay, having one-off exposures and our body has time to recuperate and detoxify. But if we've got repeated exposure, such as mold exposure that may be in the house, the mold spurs, and that constant exposure is too much for the body. It's too much stress for the body. So, and then we have the mental stresses. So these are probably the worries we have in our life and the past traumas that we haven't got over. So it's either the past is running us or the future is running us. A worry in the future, so typically is, a worry will be created through us, not wanting to lose something that we are infatuated over. So we have an infatuation over it. We have an attachment to it. So it could be a relationship. We don't want to lose that. And so we start to worry about the potential or the nightmare of losing that loved one. And the other one is someone coming into our lives that we don't want. So that person that comes into our, we don't want to ever see that person again. So it's that disliked person or resented person popping into our lives and featuring in our life. And we worry about running into that person. Or it could just be, things from the past that are popping up, and then we worry about that happening in the future. So and it could be work imposed, it could be new situations, uncertainty around, say, you've been given a task that you've never done before, and you worry about whether you are capable of doing that task. And so these worries are in the future. They can be created from past situations and projected again into the future, or future situations that you haven't encountered that you allow, I guess, your mind to run away and catastrophize the outcome, make it the worst case scenario. So that's worries. And then, so these stresses and worries will play out in our body. They will manifest out in these forms of feeling anxious. So we will get anxious when we are uncertain about future events and we can't control it. We will start to feel what it's like experiencing or playing out that event in the future. We start to feel it in our body. And so, what to look out for if you're thinking, "Well, do I do this?" Well, it's uneasiness. It will be that nauseated feeling in the stomach. You feel a bit sick or queasy in the stomach, that nauseation, and you feel like vomiting. So that can be that you're actually playing out that future event. Your mind's running away, it's playing out, and your body's actually experiencing that, what it feels like being in uncertain in that situation and not knowing what to do and not having control. What you'll find is your heartbeat increases. So this is the same as with stresses on our body. So these stresses, again, they can just be perceived, imaginary. They can be a worry, or, in terms of mental, or they could be a physical stress, work demands on your body. And how they play out is the body gets ready for that stress. So the body goes into fight or flight mode, and it turns on the heart, or accelerates the heart. It's acceleration of the heart. So you get rapid heartbeats. You start to feel yourself breathing faster because you need to get more oxygen into the body to fuel the muscles so that you can get away from the threat, or you can fight the threat. And so we go into this fight, flight mode, so we can get away, fight it, or we freeze, we pause, and we don't know what to do. And so they're stress responses from the body, but they can be created through worrying about a future event. So we can actually imagine ourselves, like if it's a public speaking event and you're imagining yourself losing yourself on stage and you can't find the words and everyone's looking at you and they're starting to snicker and you're starting to feel uneasy. And so you'll start to feel that in your body, what it's like, actually, as if it's playing out in reality, but it's not. It's you projecting the future as to what it would be like to be up on stage and not remembering your words. And so what these events can, in essence, do is prepare us. And that's what they're doing in our body. They're preparing us. But we want to prepare in such a way that we have control. So we realize that the situation, that we are projecting the future situation, but we want to bring it into something tangible in the now that we can actually do something about it. So there's no point worrying about things that have a very low probability of actually happening. We best to think about the more likely scenarios and addressing them. So, for example, what you can do with your worries is actually list out your worries, and with each worry, state whether it's possible. So possible, yes or no. And then state what's the probability of it occurring. Is it a high probability, a medium probability, or low probability? All the high ones are things that we can then think about, what can I do about this now? So if it's a public speaking event, for example, we can start preparing, we can start researching, we can start talking to expert public speakers and get their tips as to how they properly prepare for it. And we could engage a speaking coach, for example. So we can start looking at those scenarios and then start doing something about the ones that have a high probability of occurring, and not worrying about the ones that could happen but have a really low probability. So that's one way in which we can assess our worries in the future and do something about it in the now. So that's worthwhile. Worries that we constantly think about, that we just live out and we constantly living out, we want to question where they're coming from. So is it coming from a past experience that we're now projecting into the future happening again? Then we want to make sure we do something about that past experiences. And there's cognitive behavioral therapy, for example, is one where you can seek professional help and get help around better understanding what you can do about it from a thinking and behavioral perspective. One technique that I've learned is the DeMartini method, and that is looking at those past experiences and actually going into the moment and altering your perception or getting a full perception of that moment. What do I mean by that? So it's actually taking you back to the situation and getting back present in the situation. So you're actually there, present, back into that scenario. What you're looking for is the counterbalance to what you judged in that moment. So if you judged that that situation was all negative and you have this list of negatives about that situation, what you want to look at in that moment, how did it benefit you in that moment? What were the benefits of what happened to you in that moment? And then what you start to do is stack up the benefits. And once you've exhausted the benefits in that moment, you can then look at that from that moment up until now to continue to look at how that event has how you have benefited from that event. And what we start to realize is that that event had both sides always. In that moment it did. And from that moment onwards, it had a duality. In a sense, it had a downside, but also had an upside. But from that event, and the reason why we're traumatized from that event is that we just took away the downsides and judged it and labeled it as negative and that it was no good. However, we missed and we were blinded to the upside. We were blinded to the upside, the benefits to us. And we can equilibrate that, we can balance that event by going to the moment and looking at how it served us, how it benefited us, if we perceived it as traumatic. And so that can really help alter how we then see that event in the future. We won't be run by emotions around that event because that event has all these associations to it, sensory associations that we can then pick up in the future that then remind us of that past event. And so if we don't dissolve how we perceived that past event, then we're going to constantly have that past event run us in the future because we'll have triggers that are associated with that past event. The other thing about that past event, it will create a nightmare in the future about it happening again. And so what we need to also dissolve is the nightmare around it. And so we can look at, the fantasy we have around it, how it should have been, how we wanted it to be, so how we wish that had played out. And then we can look at the downside if we had have got what we wanted in terms of the way in which we wanted that situation to play out. What was the downsides of actually getting what we wanted? And then we balance our perceptions around the fantasy we had, and we bring down the fantasy and we actually see it as it is, as opposed to a projection of a nightmare or a projection of how we wished it had been. And so these nightmares and fantasies will create worries in the future if we don't dissolve the past event, where it's coming from, or how we perceive the world should be. If we're putting projections on the world that the world should be this way, then what will create nightmares around if it's not that way in the future. So again, it's really about balancing our perceptions and seeing things as they are, as opposed to judging them and labeling them and wishing them had have been another way, because there's beauty in everything. And we can see the hidden order in everything that transpires in front of us if we look to balance our perceptions. So what you want to think about is if something makes you feel uneasy and you're starting to get anxious about something that's happened to you, and you're starting to feel emotions around it, if they're negative emotions you're feeling, then what you want to start looking at is what you're judging in that moment as being negative, because what you're doing is labeling that situation that's happened to you, and you're saying, oh, this is not good, this is a terrible situation, but you're not balancing that as to what are the benefits, how is it serving you.